Hello and welcome to the second part of our discussion about learning, memory, and intelligence. And in the first part of our lecture, we did talk about learning. We discussed what we call classical conditioning by Pavlov. And then after that, we talk about the perspective of Albert Bandura. So under the theory of Albert Bandura, he spoke about what we call observational learning. Then after that, we talk about self-efficacy and the factors affecting self-efficacy. So we did learn that it's important for you to be efficacious because efficacy predicts a lot of positive outcomes. For example, being efficacious in what you do allows you to feel more confident, hence you are more likely to be successful in contrast to situations wherein you are not so efficacious about. For example, if you don't feel that you are efficacious in, for example, public speaking, then you might have some anxiety in speaking in public, which might lead to difficulties in expressing your thought publicly, which may ultimately lead to an uncomfortable situation. For example, if you have a final exam in English class which requires you to speak in public, that may not be you may not be able to show your best performance because of your anxiety. So it's important for you to, for example, practice or to learn your material first, which also applies to different areas in life in order for you to be more efficacious. And we also talk about the importance of support from other people, as well as our our physiological and emotional states. For this part of our lecture, we are going to talk about memory. And as I mentioned to you last time, memory is very important in learning because in memory, we do remember what we learn, and it allows us to have an integrative self. Because who you are right now and who you will be in the future will continually be integrated to your past. So maybe what who you are in the present has a lot to do with who you are in the past, or perhaps if you wanted to change, then we can you can make use of the different theories that you have learned in this course. And for example, you try to address your fear of public speaking by practicing more, so that the conditioning will change. Instead of being afraid of public speaking, you will be more confident about it. So memory will be a very useful tool to have, but sometimes we can have bad memories as well. For example, our bad memories about public speaking may continue to haunt us until the present. That's why we are not confident about speaking in public. So let's go to the basics now. When we say memory, it refers to an active system that receives, stores, organizes, alters, and recovers information. And here in our lecture for today, we are going to talk about the different types of memory. But before that, we need to talk about the processes involved in memory. And these are what we call encoding, storage, and retrieval. And when we say encoding, that's when you somehow write the information in your working or your short-term memory. For example, I ask you, kindly remember the words cat, dog, and rabbit. So you are trying to encode it right now. But if you still remember that word until later today, then perhaps those three words have been stored. They were not just encoded, but also they were stored in the long-term memory. And then when I ask you, can you recall the three words that I told you earlier today? We are now using what we call retrieval. Contrary to the common misconception, when we try to retrieve information from our memory, we do not retrieve it as the way that we encoded it, but rather our retrieval of our memories can be flawed. It can be affected by other factors. For example, if you are not feeling so happy right now, if you are feeling sad, disappointed, or anything, you might only remember negative information. But if you are happy right now, then I can assume that you will only remember information that are nice to remember. So our emotional states are also important in memory, because when we talk about memory, the part of the brain responsible for that, highly responsible and mainly responsible for that, would be the hippocampus. Okay, and this information that we try to store, it is not really stored in the hippocampus, but rather it is being stored in the cerebral cortex. And I think in the other lectures I spoke about the cerebral cortex, or the the part of the brain that is, in layman's term, the one that is on the top, okay, or it's the one with the convolutions, or the like the curvy part of your brain that you see most of the time when you Google the word brain. So here's a good analogy to understand hippocampus. It's like the librarian that if you're going to retrieve something, the hippocampus will look for that information from where it's stored those certain information or memory. However, I want you also to know that other than the hippocampus, we have what we call the amygdala. And the amygdala is also relevant in memory, but at the same time, it's important in emotions and emotional states. So in other words, amygdala is more responsible for what we call emotional memory. And that's the reason why we are afraid of things like a tiger or a snake. It's because when we see these things, our amygdala will try to communicate with other parts of the brain that we need to run from that situation. So somehow that the amygdala interacts with the hippocampus, and it will tell us that the next time that you will see something like a snake, you need to run from it, because I think you remember what happened the last time that you saw a snake. Maybe something bad happened to you, so you need to avoid this situation in the future. So the amygdala is also another important part of the brain when it comes to memory, but it's more important in emotions and emotional memory. That's why some people may have problems in their amygdala, which may explain things like problems like phobia, which should be treated by a professional. So the different psychological problems that we experience, sometimes when we get exposed to them for an extended period of time, they may even cause permanent changes to our brain structures. That's why we need to, as early as possible, we need to undergo the right interventions before things get worse. All right. Anyway, so let's proceed to our other subtopics here. So here is the three-stage model of memory, and here we will learn that there is what we call sensory memory, short-term memory, and the long-term memory. And when we say short sensory memory, this is a memory, or it's the one that holds information for a very brief period of time, for 1/2 second, or just a few milliseconds. So maybe you're skeptical right now. You're asking, is there such thing as sensory memory? How are we supposed to hold an information for only a very brief amount of time? If you're not convinced, here's the best example for sensory memory. So, for example, maybe you have seen for example, a lightning, and I guess that the seeing a lightning, it will not really last for more than a second, but most of the time, it's just a quick flash, or it's less than a second. But you still remember that you have seen a lightning. So that's one proof that sensory memory exists. Okay, so that's very important. Particularly, sometimes we have so do not underestimate your brain, because you have the capability to somehow detect slightest changes in the environment. That's why sometimes you can say that I felt like someone just walked past me, but I forgot his or her face. So perhaps it was your sensory memory that was involved in that one. It's only 1/2 second. And after that, we have what we call short-term memory, which is responsible for store information for around 2 to 30 seconds. Okay, so that's the short-term memory that we know. So with the use of the short-term memory, we can, for example, we can solve problems, we can remember cell phone numbers, we can remember where we were a few seconds ago. For example, you remember that you took a left turn while driving a car so that you won't easily get lost. So that's the importance of short-term memory. So not everything in the short-term memory will be encoded in the long-term memory. For example, if you are driving in a strange place, or you haven't been there before, and you took a right turn and then a left turn, then there are instances wherein at night, when you are now on your way back, you say that you don't remember the roads that you took earlier that day. So that is the proof that not everything in the short-term memory will be transferred to the long-term memory, especially if you are not exerting effort to encode them. or you are not exerting effort to store them. For example, why is there a need to remember the cell phone number of your classmate if you can simply store it in the long-term memory of your cell phone? So that I think that makes life easier for us. Okay, so the difference between short-term and working memory is that some scientists will contest and say that working memory is a type of short-term memory, and working memory is the type of memory that you use when you are now trying to manipulate the information in your short-term memory. So what does that mean? Simply remembering a cell phone number is using short-term memory. But if I ask you to do something like this, remember a set of number, but I want you to dictate those numbers to me in the ascending order. So now you are now manipulating the memory in your mind, and you are now converting it into, you are now making use of what we call working memory. So that's why we can see people in the Guinness Book of World Records wherein they show their talents in using their working memory, wherein they can solve mathematical problems even without the use of a scratch paper or a whiteboard. So I guess they're so gifted. And when we go to the topic of giftedness, I would like to tell you that there are more questions than answers about where do these gifts came from. Okay, so going back to the topic. So now you know the difference between working and short-term memory. So it's best for us to conclude that working memory is still under short-term memory, but the difference is that in working memory, you are now manipulating the information in your mind. For example, when you are trying to you're trying to fix a Rubik's cube. So you still remember, this is what I was able to do 2 moves ago, 3 moves ago. So you somehow keep a pattern in your mind while doing things. And if you really need to remember the information, so you make efforts to store it in the long-term memory, like memorizing, using mnemonics, using a song, etc. And and in the long-term memory, it has the capability of holding as little as 30 seconds and as long as a lifetime. Okay, and it will just be there in your brain. However, common sense will tell us that as time goes by, we tend to forget memories, and the way that we recall memories, it may not be as accurate as when we encoded them. It may be flooded with wrong information, or sometimes we may have what we may recall the wrong information, or sometimes we are recalling what we call false memories. So that's what happens, for example, in the context of fake news or misinformation. For example, criminals may be talented in distorting information so that the jury will be misinformed, and they will unconsciously encode the false information. So that's why there are different ways to be more accurate in memory. But personally, I will endorse using a notebook because I know myself that I cannot encode everything in my long-term memory. So I still think it's the best for me to have a logbook about what's happening in the every day of my life, every single day of my life. Okay, so there are different ways to do this, like taking down notes, or for example, transforming what you learn into a song, and etc. So we learn from this slide that we have what we call sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. And at the end of the day, this is related to what we call the hippocampus and sometimes the amygdala. So people with damage to their hippocampus have difficulties recalling information. For example, if you have heard of the condition among soldiers, well, this is not only present among some soldiers, but anyone can be diagnosed with this condition, what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. So in post-traumatic stress disorder, even though, for example, a soldier may have been psychologically traumatized by his experiences during the war, and then years after the war, when he tries to sleep or when he's having a good day, suddenly he will have random flashbacks as if he was in the middle of the battlefield, and then you will just be surprised that your relative who is a soldier is shouting, saying that the Japanese are coming and everybody needs to hide. So that is one symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. And research will show that people with post-traumatic stress disorder may have problems with their hippocampus. That's why some of them may have problems in things like remembering the right information, or they may have problems in creating new memories. For example, after being diagnosed with PTSD, it's now hard for you to concentrate. That's why it's difficult for you to, for example, to study a new subject. It's hard for you to acquire a new skill. So that's the debilitating effect of being exposed to psychological trauma for an extended period of time. So they need to undergo intervention, both medical and psychological. So if you know someone with PTSD, they may experience nightmares, flashbacks, and what we call random recall of negative experiences that traumatize them. For example, they were hit by random people, or there was a violent person who tried to kill them, frustrated murder, etc. These people are prone to PTSD, so they really need intervention so that the damage will not be, so that they will have the right intervention, so that they will their condition will improve, and they will no longer be bothered by these negative memories. So there are a lot of interventions out there that psychiatrists can administer, and I've heard that there are some studies being conducted lately in other countries wherein they use what we call um, virtual reality therapy, because you need to help the person go through his traumatic experience again, and he needs to be able to handle those emotions so that he will no longer be bothered by those concerns or problems. So that's one way to treat it. And there are other techniques as well. Anyway, I just inserted that in case you know someone with PTSD. I'm just raising awareness so you will have an idea about their experiences. And it's not an easy condition to manage. That's why the people with mental illness or mental health concerns, they need interventions from experts or people who are trained to conduct or deliver the right interventions. Anyway, we are now going to learn about what we call types of long-term memory, because not all types of memory, we don't have only one type of memory, but rather there are various types of memory. For example, in this theory, they are claiming that there is what we call declarative and non-declarative memory, but I saw in your module that you use the word implicit and explicit memory. So I just a disclaimer, I want you to know that it's just the alternative term for the declarative and non-declarative. So what is the difference between declarative and non-declarative? In non-declarative memory or implicit memory, I simply would like to call this as unconscious memory, meaning when you try to recall these information, you don't do them consciously, but rather these are processed subconsciously. For example, motor skills like walking. If you try to walk, you don't say step by step what you're going to do, like raise the right foot and then put the right foot down, then raise the left foot and put the left foot down. You don't do that anymore as an adult. But we have an unconscious memory on how to walk, how to ride the bike, how to eat, etc. So whenever you need to use that skill again, you do not consciously say the steps that are involved. Okay, and it also explains the habits and the classically conditioned reflexes. For example, if it's hot, you need to take your hand away from the surface, but you don't process that consciously. It's more of a subconscious response to that situation. So that's the non-declarative memory or the implicit memory, or simply the unconscious memory. On the other side of the equation, we have what we call the declarative memory or the explicit memory, also known as conscious memory. So this is the type of memory that most of the time you verbalize in order for you to recall these types of memories. For example, on one side, we have what we call the episodic memory, or these are your memories of events that you experience. For example, what happened during your 18th birthday. Okay, what happened 1 day ago or 1 month ago? That would be the episodic memory, or events that you experience. And on the other side of the equation, we also have semantic memory, or this involves facts and general knowledge. For example, I may ask you, who is the second, the third president of the Philippines? Who is our vice president? What's the name of your professor? So that is not episodic, but rather that is semantic memory. But there are also instances wherein when you try to recall a memory, it can be both episodic and semantic. For example, I asked you to recall what happened during your 19th birthday, and you also told me some facts that your mother was there, your father was there, and then you recalled that you had 5 friends who attended your birthday celebration. So there is an overlap between episodic and semantic memory. But the bottom line is that in declarative memory, you can consciously recall these memories and say them and put them into words. Unlike in non-declarative, most of the time you recall these memories unconsciously, just like when you are using your skills. The difference between recalling and remembering is that remembering is spontaneous recollection of something previously experienced. For example, you might tell me that you remembered something that you studied from another subject, but you did not consciously try to recall that information. It suddenly came into mind while we were talking about, for example, Sigmund Freud. You remembered someone else, or for example, you remembered your brother. So that's remembering, but with recalling, it involves actual search for the past experiences. And that's when the librarian in our mind is actually looking for the information. For example, I ask you, how do you get to the South Luzon Expressway? Perhaps you're going to use recall in order for you to tell me what are the roads that I need to take and what time should I leave in order for me to get to that place, and what would be the duration. You are now recalling based on your own experience. And this time, let's talk about intelligence. So, at the end of the day, we should talk about intelligence or your overall intellectual capability. Some of you may be curious, how do I get my IQ measured? Do I go to Facebook and take an IQ test? I would like to tell you that you don't have to do that, and you should not do that, because that is one of the most unreliable or invalid way to measure your IQ. You should only trust the procedures used by a psychologist or an assessment psychologist in measuring your intelligence, because we use tests that are reliable and valid, and we are trained to do that. Okay, anyway, so intelligence is defined by Wechsler as the aggregate or global capacity to act purposefully, to think rationally, and to deal effectively with his environment. So for him, that's his definition of intelligence. So it's not only about schooling, it's also about practicality. So how can you deal with the situations that you face in every single day of your life? So it's not always about academic intelligence, but there are various types of intelligence. For example, one of the most well-known theories of intelligence would be Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, which says that there are what we call spatial intelligence. I would say that this involves for example, driving or navigating, and I think I'm really good at this. And other than that, we have naturalists. So if we have listeners here who love nature, who they love gardening, they like to plant, or they like to take care of their crops, etc. I also think that this is high among, for example, farmers. So they are naturalists. And we also have what we call musical, which is very obvious and self-explanatory for singers, dancers, composers, etc. And we have what we call logical mathematical for those who like science and mathematics and you like making conclusions based on data. So that would be your expertise. And we also have existential. And if you remember from our other discussion here in understanding the self, we have what we call spirituality or transcendence, or understanding things that are beyond yourself. For example, that can be God, the supreme being, or that can be nature, or that can be the community. So that would be existential intelligence. For example, knowing the meaning of life and the importance of life, and asking yourself some questions that, or you are reflecting on some message that you receive, okay, or the capability to understand the meaning of the things that are happening in your life. That would be existential. And we have interpersonal capability to sensing people's feelings and motives. So this would be important, I would say, for example, in customer service, in politics, as well as in public service or in helping profession like what we do, psychometricians and psychologists. And we have bodily kinesthetic, which is very important among athletes and other professions that require you to have good bodily coordination. And linguistic, the capability to express yourself. For example, broadcasters, reporters, public speakers, and teachers. Okay, so that would be linguistic and intrapersonal. So I think this is also similar with what we call existential. So you don't just understand others like in interpersonal, you also need to have a good relationship with yourself. You know what you feel and you know what you want. Okay, so I think that with understanding the self, we were able to increase your intrapersonal intelligence so that you have a better relationship with yourself and you understand your own psychological needs and you know about the different things that you should do and the different things that you should avoid, or you know your strengths and limitations. And other than that, we have the theory of Sternberg. So I guess back in sexual self, we did talk about Sternberg's theory of love, but this time we are going to talk about Sternberg's theory of intelligence. So he really likes triarchic theory or theories with triangular frameworks. Anyway, so if Gardner had these many types of intelligence, for Sternberg, there are only three major types of intelligence, and basically this is his own perspective. Okay, there are others who would say that there is only one type of intelligence. For example, that's the belief of Charles Spearman, who proposed that there is a G, or the general factor, but the G, although we have the general intelligence, it has different specific types of intelligence. So that's the reason why other theories like Gardner's and Sternberg have emerged. But anyway, going back to this, in Sternberg's theory, there are three, which are: first, we have analytic intelligence, which allows us to use mental steps to solve a problem. For example, that can be useful in schooling or um, in schooling, or for example, when you are when your job requires you to use problem solving. For example, you have a career in finance, or you are a mathematician, or you are a scientist. So you need to have a good grasp over your mental skills or your mental steps to do problem solving. But we also have what we call practical intelligence, which allows us to read and adapt to the context of everyday life. So you know how to navigate on your day-to-day problems, on your day-to-day challenges. So that would be what we call practical intelligence. So it's not always about schooling or work, but also your day-to-day challenges and how do you attempt to solve these challenges. For example, that can be about commuting, getting to work, communicating with other people. So that's practical intelligence. So there are people that are what we call street smart, so they know how to handle themselves in different situations. And we also have what we call creative intelligence, which is used in ways that foster insight. And this is creative intelligence, which is creative from the word create. So creative intelligence is used in instances wherein we have to deal with a situation that we haven't encountered before. For example, you haven't had an experience on how to replace a flat tire, but one day you had a rough day on the road and your tire was damaged and it was flat. So you need to do something with that flat tire, but you don't have any experience in dealing with that problem. So people with high creative intelligence have the capability to navigate their way through challenges in order for them to solve these new challenges. So there are people who are really gifted in achieving insight in new or in new challenges or in new situations. So some people may be good in analytic intelligence, some people may be good in creative, while some people may be good in practical. So that also explains our individual differences. So I hope that this lecture have been an insightful lecture for you, and I also hope that you learn that you should not only prioritize your academic intelligence, because there are different types of intelligences. Like, for example, that can be in athletics and musical, and you need to hone your own talents, and you shall not only rely on one type of intelligence to measure your worth. Okay, so don't always say that because you have a um, low analytic intelligence that you're already not as good as others, because we don't know what if you have skills that others don't possess. So at the end of the day, like what I told you in the first part of this lecture, as much as possible, avoid what we call social comparison. Do not compare yourself to other people, but rather you only need to compare your present self with your previous self. Okay, and that's it for this lecture, and I hope that you learned a lot about the origins of learning, memory, and the various types of intelligence. So thank you for listening and have a nice day.